All right, good evening, everybody. Let's try this again. We're getting a nice big rain shower here in Durango tonight. I'm kind of enjoying that, but it cut off the power to my computer for a minute. I think I have it all fixed and have now shared the live stream on all the Facebook pages that I usually do, and I should be ready to play a fun concert for you. Thanks for tuning in and bearing with me. Tonight's concert, if you don't see in the posting there, is entitled Gems of St. Louis Ragtime. And I stole this title from the wonderful Dick Zimmerman, who is a legendary ragtimer and was also a professional magician. He was one of the founders of the Magic Castle and was Ian Whitcomb's accompanist for many years. Dick did 2 CDs that I've loved for a long time. One called Gems of Texas Ragtime, and then he followed that up with Gems of St. Louis Ragtime. So I borrowed that title, and maybe sometime I'll do a whole concert of Texas rags. But for now, we're going to focus on St. Louis, which is, of course, the city where classic ragtime prospered in the early 1900s. Scott Joplin lived in Sedalia, Missouri, and then shortly afterwards moved to St. Louis. And there were so many great American composers there that I thought I would represent an entire concert of mostly classic ragtime and authentic ragtime piano instrumental music from the city of St. Louis. Oh, I saw a request here for one of Charlie Thompson's rags. I saw that last week. I'm going to do a number of his pieces at the very end of the concert, so if you stick around, I'll be happy to play that for you. First off, what could I begin with but St. Louis Rag, written by Tom Turpin, the owner of the Rosebud Cafe in St. Louis, 1903. Joe Jordan told my friend, the late Johnny Maddox, that he was the arranger of the sheet music to this tune when it came out in 1903. His name is not credited on the sheet music, but it's very possible that he wrote this down. St. Louis Rag by Tom Turpin. Thank you very much. St. Louis Rag. That piece, of course, was written for the Louisiana Purchase Exposition otherwise known as the St. Louis World's Fair, in 1903. Now, the fair was delayed a year and did not open until 1904, but that piece was written a year earlier. And so I thought it would be very appropriate to play more of Tom Turpin's music, and I know almost all of the rags that he wrote. The next one we're going to do was his very first, and goes all the way back to 1897. In fact, this is supposed to have been the first rag ever published by an African-American composer. And it's called the Harlem Rag. We assume that that means Harlem in New York City, but it's kind of odd that he would name it Harlem Rag since he lived in St. Louis. I really don't know the explanation for that. And I'll tell you more about Turpin in a little bit. But for now, here's Harlem Rag. Harlem Rag. Thank you, folks. I mentioned Tom Turpin, I think, in one of my virtual concerts just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And Traber Tishner, the great ragtimer from St. Louis, he told me, I thought this was interesting, that if he could go back in a time machine to hear any of the original ragtimers play, the one that he would want to meet and hear him play would have been Tom Turpin. And he is definitely one of the people that helped get the ragtime craze going in St. Louis. Even though the people that knew him were surprised to find out that he even played the piano. He was known as a businessman and a saloon keeper and so forth. His brother Charlie Turpin was involved with the Booker T. Washington Theater in St. Louis. And so let me play another Turpin rag for you. And I tried to play this a few weeks ago, but it got cut off. I think the live stream had an issue that night. So let's do it again. This one from 1899, Bowery Buck by Tom Turpin. And the third section of this piece was supposedly a popular Chestnut Valley street organ melody. The Bowery Buck. Bowery Buck. Thank you very much, folks. Well, it looks like everything's working pretty well tonight, so yes, go ahead and hit the like button. Thank you, Kelly. Please do that on all 3 websites, even Twitch. I assume there's a like button there. It helps with the social media algorithms. And if you enjoy this kind of music, I do accept virtual tips for these concerts. You can send in a tip on PayPal or Venmo, and the information is in the postings in the chat, and should be easy enough to find. I appreciate that. Well, Leo, I am going to do a Scott Joplin piece tonight. I might play that for you in a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about the city of St. Louis. I have played there a couple of times myself, at least maybe 3 times at the Scott Joplin House, which is a state historic site on Del Mar Boulevard in St. Louis. And, you know, I think it's good to break up these programs of instrumental rags with ragtime songs from the period, some of which are a little better known today. And here's one that you might not normally associate with St. Louis, but it is definitely based on a true story that happened in that city. In October of 1899, Frankie Baker shot her 17-year-old boyfriend, Albert Britt, and they wrote a song about it. You might call it a folk song because no one's sure exactly who wrote it. But the first published version of this tune, under the title Frankie and Johnny, came out in 1912, and it was credited to the Leighton brothers, who were a vaudeville team of that era, and they subtitled it, Or You'll Miss Me in the Days to Come. So I may even play a little bit of the verse that the Leighton brothers wrote for Frankie and Johnny, just to kind of add a little variety here tonight. And so I'm going to do this tune for you. And I always also do it with the St. James Infirmary Blues because it fits in just perfectly. Here's Frankie and Johnny, Or You'll Miss Me in the Days to Come, along with the St. James Infirmary Blues. Thank you very much, Frankie and Johnny. Well, like I said, I just like to throw in the ragtime songs for a little bit of variety. But let me play one more Turpin piece. I think I did Buffalo Rag in a virtual concert not too long ago, so that leaves one more, which was published in 1900. And it's kind of an odd piece. It's very short, but it's very fun to play. And it's called A Ragtime Nightmare. So let me play that for you next, and then maybe we'll get into the Scott Joplin. Next up, Ragtime Nightmare by Turpin. Ragtime Nightmare. Apparently part of the melody of that piece is based on a banjo tune that was very popular in the 1890s, and I have a cylinder record of one of those tunes. I also have it on a music box disc. It's either Darky's Dream or the Darky's Awakening. Pardon the politically incorrect language, but that's the name of the piece. So anyway, there's a little bit about Turpin. Meet Me in St. Louis. You know, I did some of the songs from that last week during the 1940s concert. I did The Boy Next Door and the Trolley Song, which are from the movie. So I may not play that tonight, if you'll forgive me, Kelly. And Trevor Tishner, you know, I may play some of his music as well, but I played that not too long ago during one of my virtual concerts. I like to try and change things up. And with that said, let's move on to Scott Joplin, who of course was the king of ragtime, and he lived in St. Louis for, I don't know how long. It probably wasn't much longer than 6 or 7 years, but that was probably one of his most productive periods. He wrote The Entertainer while he lived in St. Louis in 1902. And then in 1904, of course, the St. Louis World's Fair opened, and Scott Joplin wrote a piece in honor of that fair, which I have never performed before, but you're going to hear it right now. And here's my original copy from my collection. It has a wonderful picture on the cover, and it's named after the Cascades, the waterfall at the St. Louis World's Fair. So here is the Cascades by Scott Joplin. Yeah, somebody in the chat there already knew what it was going to be. This is one of Joplin's more difficult pieces, actually, particularly the octave runs in the third section of the piece. The Cascades, a Rag by Scott Joplin. The Cascades. Thank you very much, folks. I have seen something very similar to what they had at the St. Louis World's Fair. My stepfather, Scott, grew up in Jackson, Michigan, where they have sort of a, I guess you might call it a tourist attraction. It's just a local, landmark called the Cascades, and they have flowing water over these waterfalls, and at night they have light shows with the water, and it's a very neat thing to see. Now let's see. Do you want more Joplin, folks? It looks like they want more Scott Joplin, and I really don't know which one to play. Jim, I don't know Weeping Willow. Yeah, Leo wants to hear Easy Winners. Let me play that for you, since I may not get too many other requests in tonight. Let me play Easy Winners for you. And Bethina, I don't know either. Easy Winners is appropriate because he wrote that in 1901, which would have been the year that he moved to St. Louis. The Easy Winners. thank you, folks, and thanks for the request. The piece is not that difficult, I don't think. It is written in part in the key of D flat, and I think my favorite interpreter of the classic rags was John Arpin. So I also use some of his arrangement, the way I play it. Now let me check what's on my list here. Okay, I know what I'm going to play for you next. I decided I would try and learn at least 2 or 3 new pieces for tonight's concert, and one of the ones I chose is sitting right here on the piano. This, I think the way to word it best is this is the first ragtime piece that John Stark and Son ever published after the music of Scott Joplin. So Joplin had a Maple Leaf Rag published by Stark in 1899, and then Swipesy Cakewalk in 1900. And the first, I think Stark may have published music by other people, but the first ragtime piece that he published was the Manhattan Rag in 1901, and here's an original copy of it. I think I bought this from Dick Zimmerman years ago. And the Manhattan Rag was written by Fred Brownold. And now Fred Brownold later changed his name and simplified it to Ted Brown. And he became a very important music publisher in the 1920s and 30s, popular music, also a composer of pop tunes in that era. But this may have been one of his first pieces. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. And so I'm going to play it for you now. John Stark, of course, is the man that coined the term classic ragtime. And even the pieces he published by composers other than Joplin are a little bit on a higher level musically. So this would be kind of fun to play. The Manhattan Rag from 1901 by Fred Brownold. And I have had at least 2 personal friends that met Ted Brown in person. Of course, he went by Ted Brown later on. That's what he would have been known as at that time. And Johnny Maddox told me that he met him in Chicago, I think. And also the great piano roll collector Mike Montgomery told me, I'm pretty sure he told me that he met Ted Brown. It's pretty neat to think about. I love personal connections like that. Anyway, Manhattan Rag. kind of a fun one? Thank you, folks. There we go. Okay, well, it's time to discuss another one of the composers that I want to represent tonight. And he was important as a figure in ragtime music in St. Louis, in part because he was very well musically trained and was very proficient at sight reading and writing down music. Many of the great players of ragtime, of course, played by ear, but Artie Matthews was an extremely technically proficient musician, and Matthews arranged rags for a number of the other composers who couldn't write music so well. And he's famous for writing a series of 5 pieces called the Pastime Rags. And so I'll play one for you now. This is Pastime Rag number 3. I think Jim Morris asked me to play some of the Pastime Rags, so I'm kind of getting in a little bit of a request there. And the Pastime Rags are very musically unusual, and several of them feature a tango or habanera rhythm, which you'll hear at the beginning of this piece, and then it kind of goes into more straight ragtime. But anyhow, here is Pastime Rag number 3 from, I believe, about 1914 or 15 by Artie Matthews. Pastime Rag number 3. Thank you very much, folks. Well, now let's do something a little bit different. As an example of early blues, And in the very earliest period, I'm talking about the 1910s, blues and ragtime were quite similar. And the term blues became such a craze that I imagine what happened in this case, and I should have looked this up before the concert to be sure, but I imagine the publisher, John Stark, asked Artie Matthews to write a blues piece in the hopes that it would be a big seller. And so in 1915, I believe, he came out with the Weary Blues. And the Weary Blues is really not so low down and dreary. The blues tunes were played more up-tempo like ragtime. They were not that different. And one of the unique things about this piece is that it is the first notated example in piano sheet music of the walking bass line, which later became known as boogie woogie. It's the walking bass style of boogie. And you'll hear that in this piece. I have the original record of this made by Clarence Williams as a piano solo in the early 1920s, 1923. I have a beautiful copy of the 78 RPM record. And that is also the first recorded example of walking bass. So here is Artie Matthews' Weary Blues, which isn't so weary. Thank you very much, folks. Well, there's a little bit of the music of Artie Matthews. Artie Matthews later abandoned ragtime and early jazz and became a teacher of classical music. He opened a very important music school in Cincinnati, I believe it was, for African-American music students. Well, that's the story of Artie Matthews. We might mention him again later tonight, but hey, I just realized we're up to 116 viewers on YouTube. That's great. I think a little more than last week. And yeah, I'm checking Facebook now too. I haven't done that yet tonight. and 50 on Facebook. Thank you, folks. Just 2 on Twitch. Well, I appreciate you. I think I'm still learning how Twitch works. And I think I went into my online account and figured out I'd made about $20 so far in subscriptions on Twitch. So if you want to do that, I appreciate it. Now, you might see there's a player piano roll sitting on the piano. And so it's time for me to play tonight's piano roll for you. If you have not listened to my concerts before, this is a 1913 Melville Clark Apollo player piano, which is kind of nice because it has a dynamic lever here, which a lot of upright pianos do not have. And we're going to discuss another composer who, I'm not sure that he ever really lived in St. Louis. Maybe he did. He was from Indiana and then spent a little bit of time in New Orleans during his formative years. And his name was J. Russell Robinson. He wrote a number of pop tunes you might know, like Margie and I'll Be in My Dixie Home Again Tomorrow, and was a very prolific player piano roll artist. You can't see in the video, I don't think. I have an autographed picture of a number of QRS piano roll artists hanging on the wall over there. That includes Robinson. And but the reason I'm going to play this piano roll for you is because it is a roll of his very first published piece from 1909, and it was published by, guess who? John Stark and Son, and it's called the Sappho Rag. Does anybody know what Sappho means? S-A-P-H-O. Look it up for me if somebody else is curious. Maybe it's some Greek god or something like that. I don't know. Now this piano roll is kind of odd. So I did a little research on it. Here's the roll box for those of you that can see it. And I did a little research because I wanted to be more certain of what I'm telling you about this piano roll. This roll is QRS roll number 9000, and I looked it up in the Billings Rollography, which is very useful, and it says that this was released in 1953, along with another one of the Robinson rags called Minstrel Man. Now, J. Russell Robinson was still alive at that time, and it's possible that he went into QRS, the QRS Piano Roll Company, and made some piano rolls. However, there are 3 associated with him from that time period, and it says released from an earlier master in the book. I also have a Robinson roll of a piece that he wrote called Ringtail Blues, which is really cool, which was never released, and I got a recut of it from the Mike Montgomery collection. Long story short, this says played, hand played by J. Russell Robinson, but I think it sounds a heck of a lot like J. Lawrence Cook in the 1950s. I really do. But at least you get to hear the Sappho Rag. Oh, Sappho was a poet. Okay, a female Greek poet. I wasn't that far off. Wrong key, folks, wrong key. I knew that was going to happen. Let's get a fresh start on it. fun, isn't it? It's a decent roll. Those chords right there at the end, very 1940s and 50s sounding. But Robinson was still active into the 1940s. It's possible he went to the Cures piano roll studio in the early 50s and recorded some of his old rags. Let's put that away real quick. Well, and while I'm doing this, just a quick reminder, I do accept virtual tips for these concerts. If you enjoy this kind of music, you want to help me try and keep it alive, it's an easy way to support my career. You can do it on PayPal or Venmo, and if you don't trust PayPal, there's also a P.O. box on my website for checks. And I'm happy to take some more requests tonight. Maybe I can get in a few more. Let me know. Go ahead and send them in on the chat. It takes a minute for the chat to update here on my computer. Well, before I play any more requests, let me do more of the J. Russell Robinson pieces. And I know two of his instrumental rags by heart. This is my favorite of all of them. From 1911, I believe, published again by John Stark in St. Louis, because the music was of a high quality, even though J. Russell Robinson was from Indiana, probably lived there at that time. This is The Minstrel Man, a rag by Russell Robinson. Minstrel Man. Thank you very much. Isn't that a great piece? Well, let's do the other J. Russell Robinson rag that I've been playing for a number of years. I was inspired to learn this because the pianist and collector Elliott Adams from California had an extra original copy of this piece and gave this to me as a birthday or a Christmas gift a number of years ago. Again, published by John Stark about the same year, 1911. This is called The Whirlwind Rag by J. Russell Robinson. Thank you very much, folks. I love the last theme of that piece. It just has a quality that makes you want to stomp your feet. It reminds me a little bit of the Arthur Marshall rags, too. No, I don't know Breeze from Alabama by Joplin. And Deuces Wild or by Hubert how do you pronounce that? Bauschracks. I'm familiar with the pieces, but unfortunately I don't know them by heart. Have to stick to some things that I know by heart. Oh, St. Louis Tickle. Well, why don't we go back to the St. Louis World's Fair and I'll play that for you. Sure. Happy to get in another request or two. And this piece was really written by Theron Bennett, who was one of the ragtimers from Southwest Missouri. I think it was Southwest Missouri. And but it was a big hit at the St. Louis World's Fair. And I play it very much like the Johnny Maddox record. St. Louis Tickle. St. Louis Tickle. Thank you, folks. I'm going to skip Crazy Bone Rag tonight because it has nothing to do with the topic of tonight's concert. In fact, I have another tune on my list that I think you all might enjoy, but it's, again, not a tune that you would associate with the city of St. Louis, but it was written by one of the great ragtime pianists who played in St. Louis in the early 1900s. I'm sure he played at the Rosebud Saloon. And if you look in the book, They All Played Ragtime, there is a photograph of him. It was an African-American pianist named Charlie Warfield. And Charlie Warfield wrote two songs which were enormous hits in the 1910s. One called Baby Won't You Please Come Home, and then this tune, which over the years became more of a traditional jazz standard. And it's called I Ain't Got Nobody. And the music publisher and Ten Pine Alley songwriter Spencer Williams later put his name on the piece and took Charlie Warfield's name off the song completely. But there are early editions of both of those songs that have Charlie Warfield's name as the rightful composer. So here now is my own little version of I Ain't Got Nobody. I ain't got nobody, and nobody cares for me. Thank you very much, folks. So there's another tune associated with St. Louis ragtime. Now let me think. How much time do I have left? I think it's time to move on to what I want to do here to close the concert, actually. I'm going to play a number of pieces for you by St. Louis pianists that I really love. I think his style is interesting. And again, I had a personal friend that knew him, Traber Tishner, in St. Louis in the late 1950s and early 1960s. They became very good friends. Charlie Thompson only had one published composition, which came out in 1914, and it was published by a subsidiary of John Stark's music company called Syndicate Music, which published, it was only about 8 rags, as I recall. And I know a whole lot about this composer because I've done research on him for years. In fact, in a way, part of my master's thesis was written about him. He made very few recordings, a few 78 records in the late 1940s for Bill Russell's American music label. And then he was part of Bob Darch's Golden Reunion in Ragtime with Eubie Blake and Joe Jordan. And I did a whole concert discussing the music of those 3 men. And my master's thesis was written about the reunion in Ragtime. So anyhow, here from 1914, first is Charlie Thompson's great fun Lily Rag. Lily Rag. Thank you very much, folks. Oh, Dave, you've never heard this piece before? Well, I'm going to play some more by Charlie Thompson for you. Go through most of his tunes here as I close out tonight's concert. I brought out something special to show you folks. On Facebook, I posted the original cover artwork of Lily Rag, so you've seen that. But I know I've never shown this on one of my virtual concerts. Here from my collection is a Xerox copy of the Lily Rag that was produced by Traber Tishner and Russ Cassidy, who ran the Ragtime Review in St. Louis in the early 1960s. And I'll try and hold it real close. In blue ink at the top is the only original autograph of Charlie Thompson I've ever been able to obtain, and it says, let me hold it even closer, To Max Morath, Charles H. Thompson. It looks a little blurry there on the computer screen, but at least you can see a little bit of it. That's one of the treasures of my collection. It's a very poor and faded Xerox copy of the music from the 1960s, but it is autographed by Charlie. Now, his music is kind of unusual because he was involved with the classic ragtimers in St. Louis. He knew Scott Joplin, and he won a big piano contest against Tom Turpin in 1916, and was declared the Missouri State champion ragtime pianist. But he was also, Charlie Thompson was also involved with the stride pianist on the East Coast. It was mentored by James P. Johnson. I think that's partly what makes his music unusual. He couldn't read music. Lily Rag was notated by Artie Matthews. But now I'm going to play some more of his pieces for you, which Tom Breyer transcribed for me when I first met Tom well over 15, 16 years ago. And I've been playing the pieces ever since. The next up is the Delmar Rag. And we know from interviews that Charlie played both the Lily Rag and the Delmar Rag in the big contest against Tom Turpin in 1916. So the piece dates back to at least 1916. And I believe it was widely believed that this piece was named after Delmar Boulevard in St. Louis, but I don't think that was the case because that street did not have that name at the time. Traber told me that it was probably named for Delmar Gardens, which was an early amusement park in St. Louis. And if you listen real closely, you can also hear a little bit of Mendelssohn's Spring Song. It was a common theme in a number of rags of the era. Now, Delmar Rag by Charlie Thompson. Delmar Rag. Thank you, folks. And as Traber said, it was probably named for this amusement park, Delmar Gardens. That's the story of that piece. Well, Charlie also turned out a number of great blues and boogie pieces. You know, the blues dates back to the 1910s at least. Boogie Woogie probably dates back as far as ragtime as well. It just didn't have that title yet. So let's do one of Charlie's blues pieces next. And he recorded these pieces under a number of different titles. The one on the 78 record is Lingering Blues. So we're going to do that for you now by Charlie Thompson. And he also, every time he played these pieces, he did them somewhat differently. And that seems to have been a common thing of the era. If you listen to Brun Campbell or Charlie Thompson, they play in a way where they may even mix up the different sections of the piece and just do them in a different order. But here we go with Lingering Blues. Thank you so much. Lingering Blues. Well, let me do the boogie woogie piece next. And this is very unusual. You know, Charlie couldn't read music. He played most things in very difficult keys. A flat, D flat, or G flat. And so this is boogie woogie in the key of A flat. And again, he recorded it under two different titles. On the 78 record, it's called Derby Stomp. But later on, he did it under the title of Buffet Flat Blues. And I think I finally discovered why, which is because of Buffet Flat was kind of a notorious place. It was a term that would not have suited him well on a record. A buffet flat was a sort of a cross between a house of ill repute and a speakeasy as well. This is a term that was used in black neighborhoods in St. Louis and Detroit in the 1920s. So that's really what the title is. And so anyway, here we go with the Buffet Flat Blues by Charlie Thompson. A-flat blues. It's taken me years to try and figure out how to play that where it sounds more like the way Charlie played it. And Tom Breyer's transcription certainly helped, but I've worked to try and incorporate the best elements of all the different recordings of it. So that's the music of Charlie Thompson. And in fact, I saw a request, this goes back to last week, I think the fellow's name is Jonah, here on YouTube, for another Charlie Thompson rag, and this is the last one, and I will have played them all. And this is the last traditional rag that he wrote in 1964. It's very appropriate to play for tonight's concert because it's called Centennial Rag, and was written in honor of the bicentennial of the city of St. Louis, Missouri. So we're going to do Centennial Rag, and you might also notice in this piece one of the themes is quite similar to Jelly Roll Morton's King Porter Stomp. It's the trio of King Porter Stomp, which apparently was kind of a folk theme that a lot of different pianists used in the early 1900s. So here we go with Centennial Rag. Centennial Rag. Thank you, folks. Well, that satisfies a number of requests, but I did see another one that it occurred to me this would be a fun way to end the concert tonight. Let me double check all the websites, see if there's any really great requests here that I have missed. Let me see. I'm checking Facebook. Yeah. Okay, well then I think it's time to go ahead and finish. With a request I see that just came in on YouTube. I saw this earlier. I think it was from Loretta. We're going to do St. Louis Blues. Doesn't that sound good? Now, as I said in the early days, blues and ragtime are very similar. And so this fits in very well with this evening's concert. W.C. Handy, the composer, I believe he said that he heard this melody in St. Louis when he was there, living on the streets, and heard a woman wailing and singing this melody. So then he wrote the St. Louis Blues. Handy traveled around the country. I think he was practically living on the streets at one time in St. Louis. But he wrote most of his famous tunes when he lived in Memphis, Tennessee. And I start out playing it real slow, like a blues that you might have heard in later years. Then I do it in ragtime, the way Johnny Maddox taught it to me, which is the way it was originally written. And then I end with a little extra boogie-woogie. And of course, on the cover of this music, if you look at the original edition, it says, the most famous ragtime composition by W.C. Handy, St. Louis Blues. St. Louis Blues. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you for listening tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the concert. It's been a lot of fun playing this stuff for you. And I am not going to be back next week with a virtual concert. I am probably going to have to do every other week in August. I have a sort of a event next week here in Durango that's going to keep me busy next weekend. But I will be back August 13th on all three websites with another virtual concert for you. I'm not 100% sure what the theme will be yet. And thank you for those virtual tips as well. Thanks for continuing to do that. Good night for now.